Okay, let's move on to Ukraine.
Well, of course, banking and war go hand in hand. So let's move on to Ukraine. And say a couple of days ago, apologies, slightly croaky today, but let's see whether we can get through this. A few days ago, I came across this wonderful headline. Let's have a look. Russia's threat of orphaned Ukrainian children. Sorry? Theft.
Yes, Russia's theft of
orphaned Ukrainian children is genocide. It is now increasingly clear that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a war of genocide, and the Russians are stealing children. Now, we've got a very packed news today, so I'm sure viewers and listeners can go and track this article down. But if you get into it, it says the amazing thing that so many children are being stolen that it's difficult to find the evidence. I'll leave you to think about that, but the sentence is in that article. So I went to have a little look at who'd written it, and here's the gentleman concerned, Azim Ibrahim. If we just expand him a little bit, we see that he's a columnist at Foreign Policy, a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute at the US Army War College. And the moment I read this, I thought to myself, well, remarkable that this incredible story about the Russians stealing thousands of children and squirreling them back into Russia to be brainwashed into becoming Russian warriors has come out of a man connected to the Strategic Studies Institute at the US Army War College. Let's have a look at just a few seconds of the clip where they advertise themselves. I'd like to show it all, but let's just get an impression of what this Studies Institute is.
SSI's origins start in 1954. Originally created on a recommendation by a California Institute of Technology study and directed by the Secretary of the Army, the Advanced Studies Group was responsible for studying land power and conducting strategic research for the Army. The Advanced Studies Group concentrated its initial efforts in three areas of study: national defense, responsible command, and military science. Back then, its work addressed...
So we'll cut that there because it's a little bit tricky to listen to because it's another cartoon for adults. But if you follow it through, of course, what this organization is doing is briefing the American military, but also it's very active in, let's say, helping produce its own news. However, on the website, I did find an extremely interesting audio interview. Let's listen to this little clip and see what's said. The subject is a Brussels researcher talking about how the EU, how Europe sees Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to this edition of SSI Live. My name is John Denny and I'm a research professor of National Security Studies here at the Strategic Studies Institute, or SSI, at the Army War College. It's Tuesday, March 7th, 2023, and we're again going to spend this podcast marking the one-year anniversary of Russia's latest invasion of Ukraine. Today we'll turn to the European Union and its leading member states. And for this discussion, I'm joined by Dr. Sven Biskop. Sven Biskop is the director of the Europe in the World program at the Egmont Institute, otherwise known as the Royal Belgian Institute for International Relations. He's also a professor at the University of Ghent, where he teaches on Belgian and European foreign and defense policy and on the grand strategy of the European Union and other great powers. He's the author, co-author, or editor of 9 books on European security, Europe's role in the world, and grand strategy. The latest of which is Grand Strategy in 10 Words, published by Bristol University Press in 2021. And we are lucky enough and honored to have Sven here with us visiting Carlisle. Sven, welcome.
Thank you, John.
What's your sense of what more needs to be done now? So let's pick up the military angle of this, as you mentioned. What more needs to be done in that regard? And then what are the greatest impediments, do you think, to the EU or its leading member states in achieving those goals?
We're still stuck in piecemeal decision-making, and after 1 year that shouldn't be the case. The discussion moves from one weapon system to another. Now it's tanks, next will be fighter jets, but even then, short-termism prevails. Maybe Ukraine will get 100, 120 tanks over the next 2 months or so, but then what? What if after a week of intense combat, they lose 90 of them? Are we then ready to give them 90 new ones? Do we even have them? So what I think really needs to be done is for the EU to sit together with the Ukrainian defense staff and make a plan for, let's say, the next 5 years. What does Ukraine need? How is Europe going to produce it and transfer it to Ukraine?
More of a long-term vision, a long-term approach to what's been done so far.
Because I think, however this war ends, or maybe it doesn't end, we will always have to continue to really support Ukraine. Even if hypothetically there's a peace agreement, that will be fragile, and we need to build up a strong conventional European armed force as a deterrent against a third Russian invasion.
You know, in one of your most recent writings, I read you remarked about Ukraine as previously being a buffer state, now more of a front line, a frontier state. Can you kind of unpack that for us a little bit about how the EU is viewing that specifically?
I think the EU, it never called Ukraine a buffer state, but that's how I dealt with it, as an independent state that could have good relations with both the EU and Russia. And even after Russia invaded in 2014, the EU didn't really give up on that idea. It mediated the Minsk agreements between Russia and Ukraine in the hope that if these would have been fully implemented, Ukraine would have remained viable as a buffer state. But I think Russia in the end never really wanted it. And by invading again, they now made it clear it's all or nothing. Either the Russians win, and then Ukraine will be the next Belarus. It will be a protectorate, a satellite. Or, as is most likely, fortunately, an independent Ukraine survives. And I would argue that already today, Ukraine now is in reality a member of our Western security architecture.
So, Mike, I'll throw that one over to you very quickly. But what I picked up was he's casually talking about maybe 5 years of war, or maybe it doesn't end. It doesn't end, but we should sit down with the Ukrainians. They should tell us what they need to keep this perpetual war going, and the EU should provide it because the EU sees that Ukraine is already part of the system.
Well, I picked that up, but I also picked up the absolute lie from him about the Minsk agreements. He just forgets what Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande said about it. So just forget about that.
Right. And what we'll say is, of course, this was the Strategic Studies Institute. So that dialogue will be used to go back and train young American military personnel so that they understand reality, when of course what is happening is pure propaganda. Well, let's move on to something with a bit more substance, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Alan, one of our viewers, who sent this overview. I'll just read out a few bits from it. People can freeze the screen and read it themselves. But essentially it says, despite whatever propaganda on BBC, CNN, NBC, etc., here is the reality of the situation during the Battle of Bakhmut. Relentless Russian artillery bombardment. In the north of Bakhmut, assault detachments of Wagner are attacking on the territory of the Artemovsky plant for the processing of non-ferrous metals. And I can tell you that as we speak, that battle is progressing because the Wagner troops are now underground in that factory system. Judging by the radio communications of the units in the National Guard of Ukraine, Russian troops were attacking the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the direction of. And then there is a number of places named because the Russians are now starting to break through Ukrainian lines. If we go on, it says, after cleaning up the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, active clashes moved to the south and southwest of the city. Krasny and Kremovo have positional battles. Assault detachments of PMC regularly carry out attacks. Russian artillery, and this is key, Russian artillery and aviation are conducting massive fire on the fortified area of the Ukrainian formations. So we're now seeing that the Russian Air Force has been released onto the battlefield. And at the end of this particular page, and again, thank you to our viewer, Alan, I expect the Bakhmut cauldron may now be inescapable for the perhaps 20,000 Ukrainian forces there. I think there's less. I personally think there's less because we're seeing pictures of troops leaving Bakhmut, but of course they're being slaughtered as they do so. And finally, the two airfields at Chasiv Yar and Kramatorsk may be next for unstoppable hypersonic ballistic missile destruction. So you can see it on the map, but do not believe your lying eyes, say British Sky TV in their nightly summary. So a very good summing up by Alan, and thank you very much. Let's put a little bit of mapping substance to this, and I am very grateful for all the sites where I've been able to take material because we're not getting the truth by the BBC or the UK Ministry of Defence. We've got to go to amateurs who are taking the time to do it. So here we can see Bakhmut encircled, and the light blue area is the steel factory that Alan was talking about. And unlike the steel works in Mariupol, where the Russians simply waited and left the Ukrainians underground, in this case, the Wagner troops have gone into the depths under this factory to fight the Ukrainians underground. This is a picture here showing you the wings, if you like, of the encirclement north and south of Bakhmut, and the red arrows giving an indication of the fact that the Russians are moving forward. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that they're moving along one of the highways in order to increase the speed of the advance. But at the moment, there's definitely a thaw that started, and any non-metalled roads are virtually impossible, even for many tracked vehicles. South of Bakhmut, we've got exactly the same encirclement happening at Deepfake, and again you can see the scale of this. This is another fortified city of the Ukrainians, but it is being heavily pounded by the Russian forces and fully encircled. We've got some interesting hypersonic missile attacks that have occurred around Avdiivka. One of them is producing a report that a NATO supported headquarters was hit and NATO personnel were killed. Can't confirm that at the moment, but there's been a number of reports. And also to the north of Avdiivka, we've got control of Vasily, which has happened, which has been very significant for the Russians in pushing forward. This is one of the new explosions caused by the Russians, where they've now turned their attention on transport infrastructure in Ukraine, so a rail line destroyed, but just as an indication. If we have a look at what UK Defence Intelligence is doing, they are doing some pretty crude smearing propaganda. So this is their report saying, well, of course, the hierarchy, the top politicians in Russia are not sending their children to fight. The troops are coming from largely poor areas. If we ask a simple question, how many Western politicians are sending their sons and daughters to fight, I think we will find the answer is very, very few. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But it's very easy to go looking for material that is talking about how the US also uses poorer recruiting areas to fill its quotas, and it's doing so with increasing desperation, excuse me, as the Americans show that it is very difficult for them to recruit troops. In the US, aside from training troops to fight, we've now got the full woke agenda. And I'm just teasing a bit here by putting in this latest one that the most important thing for American troops is that they can tattoo themselves, although they can't get away with this gentleman's forearms. That's not approved. Here is the US instructions. But let's come back to Defence Intelligence. And I discovered this over the weekend that I thought was very, very interesting indeed, that basically they have a probability yardstick, so they can use language, but it has a probability attached to it. So if we choose likely or probable, that's got somewhere between a 55% and 75% chance of happening. Why is this significant? Well, if we go to one of their reports, we can have a look at this paragraph. It says Ukrainian forces hold the west of the town. This is in Bakhmut and have demolished key bridges, with Ukrainian units able to fire from fortified buildings to the west. This area has become a killing zone, likely making it highly challenging. Now, of course, we now know that when they say likely, they're saying there's a probability of 55 to 75%. So they've quantified a high risk for the Russian deaths. But this is how duplicitous this appalling organization is. If we look down here at the last sentence, it says, however, the Ukrainian force and their supply lines to the west remain vulnerable. So now we choose language that doesn't have a quantified high risk for the Ukrainians, even though the truth is they're being slaughtered. So here's the Independent warning us that there's been a rise in the use of deepfake technology for psy-ops. And interestingly enough, if you read this article, you'll find people in the States highly critical of the idea that the US military is going to be using deepfake. So I suppose we should have some comfort for that. But let's have a look at this little video, which is Ursula von der Leyen with Trudeau. And we've also got a bit of a clip with Ben Wallace, and it leads into a very emotional scene. I've run these clips together to try and show the people creating and promoting the war and what the end result is. I will say that the worst of the sex scenes have been taken out of the first part of the clip. You'll understand when you watch.
Just ahead of International Women's Day tomorrow, I'm struck by the fact that we're here not only with the President of the European Union, but also with our Deputy Prime Minister, our Minister of Defence, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who all happen to be strong women leaders. That is always a pleasure to see. Every day, their expertise and dedication makes the future brighter for people on both sides of the Atlantic. Ursula, encore une fois, c'est un grand plaisir de t'avoir ici avec nous aujourd'hui. À vous la parole.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, dear Justin. I've been very much looking forward to this visit. Indeed, Canada is one of the European Union's most trusted partners. We share the same vision of the world, the same democratic values. We believe in the power of cooperation, solidarity, and multilateralism. We are not only partners, we are true friends. And it is as close friends that we worked together through this last year, that we coordinated our support, for example, to the brave people of Ukraine, united in a common purpose.
До 24 лютого в мене було звичайне життя. Я займалася спортом, в мене є сім'я, донька і чоловік. Але коли прийшла біда в нашу державу, я не бачила іншого шляху, ніж йти на захист українського народу. А я рахую, кожна сім'я повинна прийняти участь у захисті, тому вибір я зупинила на собі. Вирішальним фактором, чому я зупинилася у лавах Збройних сил України, було саме загибель моїх друзів, які в першу чергу відгукнулися на це лихо, що спіткало нашу країну. Тому я вважаю, що також я подаю приклад іншим дорослим людям, тому що те, що показують по телебаченню, це одне, а коли ти знаходишся в епіцентрі артобстрілу, це зовсім інше. І коли поруч з тобою займаються 19-річні діти, а через 3 неділі ці діти підуть на передову, замість того, щоб продовжувати своє навчання. Допоможіть врятувати.
Help to survive.
Майбутнє наших дітей.
Save the future of our children.
Now, for people listening, the young girl, Ukrainian soldier at the end, was the emotion real as she described why she was going to fight? Was that real? Yes. Was she reading a script? Yes, but she broke down and she couldn't finish it. So a very young, distraught woman encouraging, presumably, other young Ukrainian women to go and fight the UK, the US's war in Ukraine, to die. So let's have a look at some analysis by HistoryLegends. This clip I had to bring onto the news today because let's consider these videos in context. This young woman The British Ministry of Defence wants to go and die. They've killed all the young men, or they are killing the young men in Ukraine. We've now got boys and old men on the battlefield. The women are to be next. Let's look at what the British Ministry of Defence wants these young men and women to go and do. Let's have a look at this analysis.
My friends, I have difficult things to announce you. It's official. East Bakhmut has fallen. As you can see on this map, Russian forces have captured everything on the east bank of the Bakhmutka River. In this video, you can see a Russian war reporter advancing through the rubble alongside Wagner PMC fighters in the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut. Judging by the footage, judging by all the destruction, heavy fighting took place there, intense artillery shelling. Not a single meter was spared. Even worse, the orchestra is reportedly storming downtown Bakhmut, as well as the Azam factory. In this video, you can see assault detachments of the Wagner PMC reaching the famous Soviet T-34-85 tank monument in Bakhmut, and where they then planted their flag in celebration. This tank monument is geolocated right here on the map, only a couple hundred meters away from the river separating the town in two. And shortly after, Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner PMC, went to pose in front of the captured monument, essentially right at the line of contact between the two armies. A pretty ballsy move, and a very effective PR stunt. And here's the video version where he says, "Take the old people and young ones and send me normal combat-ready units. Send me all the guys from Zaporozhye, from Liman. We need to deal with you now." He says this because a couple days earlier, he shows allegedly some of the latest Ukrainian soldiers that were captured by his forces. As you can imagine, this battle is not going exactly like Ukraine had expected. But I wanted to tell you about this video. However, after rewatching it, I noticed that one part of the video was missing. A full minute was removed. The video is now 24 minutes and 30 seconds, when back then, before the edit, it was 25 minutes, 30 seconds. What could possibly have been so dangerous to say that they had to trim the video? Luckily, someone saved the part that was missing.
Які думки їбануться просто, які думки. Піхота лягає, що нахуй, що не знаю. Просто, піхоту нашу б'ють, блядь, що, блядь, слов просто немає. У нас є мужики, блядь, які були там кілька днів в піхоті, блядь. Кажуть, виходять, блядь, русські як назад чекав, блядь, і все.
Ну їх же кладуть чи ні?
Кладуть, звісно, блядь, но тим не менее вони виходять, блядь, більш підготовлені. Пацанов, блядь, по 3 дня привозять, нахуй. 3 дня, блядь, на Харків завезли, от були, блядь, 2 рожка вистріляли, нахуй, Бахмут, штурмове підрозділення. Та йобаний в рот, що за штурмовики, блядь? За 3 дня якого може штурмовика зробити?
Мужики, вы же тоже лишнего не наводите.
Та що лишнього?
Шуки вже на статтю напять забалакали.
Та мені похуй, ну я що.
Оля мне 2 раза перезвонила, говорит, точно не наши выходы?
Свобода слова є в країні?
Я все равно контракты, мы еще 3 года.
Ну мені ще от контракта, мене нікуди не відпустять.
Наши, с той стороны.
And what this Ukrainian soldier says can be corroborated by this article. Ukrainian infantrymen told the Kyiv Independent of unprepared, poorly trained battalions being thrown into the front line meat grinder to survive as best they could with little support from armored vehicles, mortars, artillery, drones, and tactical information. Of the 20,000 defenders of Bakhmut, on the 4th of March, it was reported that only 4,000 remained in the city, some sort of rear guard, and probably much less by now.
So we say to viewers and listeners, do your own research to confirm what's been put forward by HistoryLegends. My own experience to date is that he's been extremely accurate in the reporting, but this is the reality of the slaughter on the battlefield, and the British Ministry of Defence is now keen to get young Ukrainian women killed fighting in a position that they can't possibly do without proper training. So I'll leave it there. I don't know whether you want to make any comment, Mike, but I think it's utterly disgusting. And let's just end on this, because, of course, in the little clip of the love-in with Trudeau and Ursula von der Leyen, what did she say? That they were working to a common purpose. And I found it interesting that the World Economic Forum has come out with this document. It's back in 2021, but nevertheless is new to me. Data for common purpose, leveraging consent to build trust. And if we get into the forward here, what they're essentially saying is, trust us, we are going to be doing more to share data worldwide, but we're only doing it in your best interest. So we'll leave it there.
Yeah, okay. Well,